Robert Burns died 200 years ago on the 21st of July 1796, leaving the world an imperishable legacy of poems and songs. Robert was the eldest of 7 children, born to William Burness, a market gardener from Kincardineshire, and Agnes Brune, a local lass from the neighbouring parish of Kirkoswald. William acquired 7.5 acres of land here in Alloway and built this cottage with his own hands. It was here that Robert was born, on the 25th of January, 1759.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I am grateful for the honour which you have accorded me tonight in the invitation to speak at Alloway Burns Club supper. And if anything could enhance for me the pleasure of the occasion, it's both the setting of the event, so near that old clay biggin which his father had built with his own hands, and that place where at the Ingle he was nursed in his mother's arms. Thousands of speakers in every quarter of the civilised globe will, over the next few days and weeks, be devoting their speeches to Robert Burns. Toasts will be pledged, and the praises of our poet will be sung. There's nothing quite like this in the whole world. No other Scottish or indeed English poet is accorded such honour and panegyrics on his birthday. No other writer of the past who commands such universal devotion and homage. And there is, I venture to think, no writer of today who will command it in the future. Why is this? Why is it that our Ayrshire minstrel has so totally eclipsed all other poets in his homeland to become so quintessentially Scotland's eternal representative? Why is it that he appeals to every class, in every age, in every place? An appeal which is independent of time, of space, of circumstance.
The cottage is now a place of pilgrimage and is the main attraction in the museum complex. John Manson is the museum curator.
Well, normally, in an average year, we get approximately about 80,000 visitors. Not as many visitors in recent times because we've got a lot of competition these days, but normally about 80,000 coming from virtually all over the world. Over the years, we've had countless thousands of Russians coming here because they, particularly of any nation, can identify with Burns, the man of the soil. In more recent times, we've had large numbers of groups of Russians coming in here, and on one instance, on January the 25th, Burns' birthday, we had a group of Russians in the cottage beside the bed where Burns was born, gathered in a circle, singing in Russian, Auld Lang Syne.
The best known song, or the best and most frequently sung song in the world is Auld Lang Syne, and there's a lot of people don't know even that it was Burns that wrote that. I mean, somebody once worked out that because of the different time zones in the world, that at any given moment in time, somewhere in the world, Auld Lang Syne's being sung at any given moment in time. And that's quite a thought, you know, to think that it was a Scotsman who wrote that and that that's been sung throughout the world. And it's a wee bit of Scotland everywhere, isn't it?
I know from my own personal experience at the Burns Centre, when we would have visitors from every corner of the world who come here to Alloway, and very few people have never heard of Robert Burns. And the very few who say, no, I haven't heard of this man until I came here, you only have to say to them, have you heard Auld Lang Syne? And for that one song alone, Robert Burns deserves immortality, because it is just known throughout the entire world. sometimes sung for various reasons. We had one young Japanese student one day who was in doing a postgraduate at one of our colleges, and as he walked through the centre, we had a tape playing of Kenneth McKellar singing Auld Lang Syne, and the boy came back and stood and listened to it, and he told us that they sang that in Japanese universities at every graduation, and he didn't know its source, he knew nothing about it, and he was very moved to discover that here he was in the village where Robert Burns was born. So these are the nice moments. That's what makes one's job worthwhile.
When Robert was 7, his father was induced by Provost Ferguson of Ayr to give up his cottage and nursery to become overseer to his land. William was offered the lease to Mount Oliphant Farm and loaned £100 to stock it.
Very soon he left the school, and the education that he got at the local school was topped up, if you like, by a local tutor, John Murdoch, who his father knew and liked and paid for. And when you think that William Burns, Robert's father, didn't have much money, it speaks volumes for the wisdom of the man that he recognised in his son. He wrote, "Whoever may live to see it, something extraordinary will come from this boy."
Robert grew up to a life of toil and hardship, but William insisted that his sons were to be well educated. By this time he was keenly interested in all that was going on around him, and developed a particular fondness for old Scots songs and folk tales. He read all the books he could get his hands on, including the classics, and soon developed a remarkable knowledge of English literature. By the age of 15, he had committed the sin of rhyme. At harvest time, he was paired with a comely lass by the name of Nellie Kilpatrick, for whom he composed his very first song, Handsome Nell.
Oh, once I loved a bonny lass, aye, and I love her still, and whilst that virtue warms my breast, I love my handsome Nell. As bonny lasses I hae seen, and money full as braw, but for a modest, grateful mien, the like I never saw. A bonny lass, I will confess, is pleasant to the ee, but without some better qualities, she's no a lass for me. 'Tis this in Nellie pleases me, 'tis this enchants my soul, for absolutely in my breast she reigns without control.
Yes, I think Burns is now becoming more and more recognised as the saviour of the Scottish heritage of songs. He collected over 300 of them for Thomson's collection and for the Johnson collection, and took not a penny piece for this. He was even offended when Thomson offered him £5, or sent him £5, and he said he would not write any more songs or do any more work if there was any more money sent to him. He was doing this as a labour of love for his country and for his heritage. And these songs are still, there are not many modern songs that are going to be sung 200 years hence. And when you have songs like Ae Fond Kiss, O the Airts, The Bonny Lass of Ballochmyle, Duncan Gray, My Love is Like a Red Rose, these songs are still being sung, still appreciated, still wept over at Burns suppers and at formal gatherings and informal nights out all over the country and all over the world.
Ye banks and braes of bonny Doon, how can ye bloom, sae fresh and fair? How can ye gently little birds, and I say weary, full of care? Ye break my heart, the
takes part in the Burns Federation competitions in the months of January and February. And the children from the age of 7 up to 12 participate by learning poetry and poems of Scotland, and particularly of Burns. And the 9, 10 and 11-year-olds take part in the competitions by learning a specific poem in their class, and then we invite judges to come into school. Now these judges could be teachers from local schools or members of the community, but we all have something in common, an interest in Burns and a desire to foster that interest among our young children. And it's lovely to see the hard work that goes into learning these competitions. In fact, today round school we have 2 judges going and visiting classrooms and hearing the children put forward their poems with great pride and a sense of purpose and achievement.
We're pleased to see the Burns Federation now redoubling its efforts to encourage youngsters to compete in Burns music, Burns literature, and I'm very proud that West Sound in actual fact donates the trophy to the Young Burnsian of the Year. And I think that as long as we've got federations like the Burns Federation and people who are interested in giving of their time and their skills to see that there is a love fostered of Burns poems, there is a very great hope that not only will he continue to rise in popularity at the rate that he is now, but eventually there will be more and more folk realise what a genius he really was.
And from the finalists, we then have boys and girls who win the certificates which are presented by the Burns Federation. So in that way, in grammar school, we are keeping the interest of Burns alive. We're also keeping the interest of Burns alive as a local boy, because we Scots like to think that local lads make good. And Burns certainly did very well in promoting the name of Ayrshire throughout Britain, throughout the world.
I think that he had many, like the gem, there were many facets to his character, and he was a genius, which is an oft used word, but sometimes misplaced or misused. In Burns' case, it could never be. But he was a man who understood people like probably no Scotsman ever did before or since. He understood the workings of the heart, and I think that is what puts Burns aside from other poets.
Hard times began in 1774. William struggled on. After 11 cruel years, Mount Oliphant had turned into a ruinous affair. He said, life at Mount Oliphant was like the cheerless gloom of a hermit, with the unceasing moil of a galley slave.
So I must toil and sweat and moil and labour to sustain me, oh, to plough and sow, to reap and mow, my father bred me early, oh.
In 1777, David McClure offered William the lease on Lochlee Farm near Tarbolton. This was a large property, which meant even harder work, and for a while the family prospered. Robert became prominent in the social life of Tarbolton, and it was here that he became a Freemason, an action which was to be to his advantage. He made the acquaintance of the Earl of Glencairn through Masonic contact, and this was to ease his way in Edinburgh society in later life.
In Tarbolton, there's the Bachelors' Club in Tarbolton, which is run by the National Trust, and that is where Burns became a Freemason. And he also started the Tarbolton Literary and Debating Society, and that still goes on there. So when you go to visit the Bachelors' Club, you're again going to a place that Burns himself would recognise if he was here today. He could go into that place and say, oh my goodness, look at that, that hasn't changed much. And that, when we moved through to Ayrshire, that was one of the things that really struck me most forcibly about the place, that you really do get the impression that Burns, it's almost as if he was, he's not that long really since he left here.
In the mid-1770s, the building was owned by John Richards, the local innkeeper. It was here that Burns first came for dancing lessons. With his brother Gilbert and 5 other local young farmers, they formed the Debating Society in November 1780. Rules and regulations were formed in order for it to run properly. One rule was that they couldn't spend more than 3 pence a night on their entertainment.
Rule 10 was probably the most interesting because it brings out Burns's philosophy in life, and it stated, "Every man proper for a member of this society must have a frank, honest, open heart above anything dirty or mean, and must be a professed lover of one or more of the female sex. No haughty, self-conceited person who considers himself superior to the rest of the club, and especially no mean-spirited worldly mortal whose only will is to heap up money, shall upon any pretence whatever be admitted. In short, the proper person for this society is a cheerful, honest-hearted lad, who, if he has a friend that is true, a mistress who is kind, and as much wealth as genteelly to make both ends meet, is just as happy as this world could make him."
I'm talking about parish ministers. I stand in a long line of great men, none more so than Woodrow, Dr. Patrick Woodrow, who was the minister here when Burns was here. Burns came up from Mount Oliphant, where he was associated with the Old Kirk of Ayr, and he came here in 1777 when he was a boy or a young man of 18. And it was a church-going community. It was a church, Bible-based family, and they came to the church here every Sunday. The whole family would come. And he found here a man, 2 men, Dr. Woodrow and his colleague and successor, John McMath, who were very much of the New Life tradition. And Burns found in them 2 men who were able to get into the kind of theology that he could accept. And also within the parish there's Willie's Mill down the road there that was, he called it Willie's Mill, it was the Turbolton Mill run by Willie Muir, and he was a great friend to Burns, so that everywhere you go in this village really you have some association with Burns. I think that poems like the Holy Fair, the Holy Willie's Prayer, came from a man who was writing from the very heart. It wasn't that he was against religion, it was against hypocrisy and those who were turning religion into something it never was, especially Christian religion. And in that wonderful verse where he says that a correspondence fixed with heaven is still a noble anchor, is aye a noble anchor. There you have the noble anchor that held him all through life. And it was because he had this deep love of and this deep respect of religion, the Christian religion, that he found the hypocrisy so abhorrent to his whole honest way of living.
In the June of 1783, Robert wrote to his first cousin James Burness, a lawyer in Melrose, to tell him that William, his father, was dying. To make things worse, McClure had taken out a writ against William. A legal dispute had been dragging on for several months over rent arrears. William appealed to the Court of Session, was successful and won his case, but was ruined financially by litigation, and soon afterwards died on the 13th of February 1784, worn out at the age of 63. He was buried in the old kirkyard at Alloway.
O ye whose cheek the tear of pity stains, draw near with pious reverence and attend. Here lie the loving husband's dear remains, the tender father and generous friend. The pitying heart that felt for human woe, the dauntless heart that feared no human pride, the friend of man, to vice alone a foe, for even his failings leaned to virtue's side.
Prior to William's death, Robert, with his brother Gilbert, had made secret plans to rent Mosgiel Farm near Mauchline. It was while he lived here that he arranged for a subscription edition of his poems to be published by John Wilson in Kilmarnock. The poems, now known as the Kilmarnock edition, were published on the 31st of July 1786, and Robert became an overnight celebrity. The poet's most prolific period began.
Burns's poetry is the poetry of a common man. It's not the poetry of an academic. It's not rarefied classical poetry. It's poetry of a simple nature which appealed to simple folk, but also appealed to the gentry, the nobility and all others. It was the poetry of experience, the poetry of the field, the poetry of the countryside, the poetry of nature. Oh, gimme ye spark o' nature's fire, that's all the learning I desire. And though I trudge through dub or mire at pluch or caird, my muse, though humble in attire, may touch the heart. Now that's Burns. That's his philosophy and his poetry, and that's what appeals to people, to the folk in Scotland and worldwide.
It's because of these things, because Burns never lost sight of who he was, what he was, and understood. There's a French phrase, and I can't remember it, but it means that he who understands with the heart understands all. And I think Burns understood everything about mankind. And that is why there is something in Burns for everybody, of every generation. I mean, born in 1759, died in 1796, and a lot of what he wrote is just as relevant today as it was more than 200 years ago.
Robert had been courting a Mauchline girl by the name of Jean Armour. Jean's family had objected very strongly against them getting married, but when he became this overnight celebrity, it changed everything, and Jean's father became very much in favour of them getting married. After the publication of the Kilmarnock edition, his fame spread rapidly. He was feted everywhere and was in great demand. A well-known blind poet, Dr. Thomas Blacklock, encouraged Burns to come to Edinburgh. The doctor sensed that he was a genius, and so an invitation was arranged for him to visit Edinburgh. And so it was to Scotland's capital that Robert went in November 1786. After the immediate success of the Edinburgh edition of poems, plans were quickly drawn up for a second edition, and once again he was Edinburgh bound. Mauchline House is now a museum, but is still recognisable as the house that Robert and Jean set up in. Jan Kelso is the house curator.
Outside here you've got the churchyard, and then adjoining the churchyard, of course, you've got Gavin Hamilton's house, who was a friend, patron and a local factor. The church hall out here actually sits on the site of the original bleaching green, where the washing was being done on a daily basis. Her sisters and herself had actually had placed the garments out on the top of the grass for the sun to bleach them dry, and the dog, Burns, had come up round the top at the cross and down and run through the laundry, so their first encounter was anything but pleasant, and things sort of snowballed from there as far as their romance was concerned.
Edina, Scotia's darling seat, all hail thy palaces and towers, where once beneath a monarch's feet sat legislation's sovereign powers. From marking wildly scattered flowers, as on the banks of Ayr I strayed, and singing lone the lingering hours, I shelter in thy honoured shade. Here wealth still swells the golden tide, as busy trade his labours plies. There architecture's noble pride bids elegance and splendour rise. Here justice from her native skies high wields her balance and her rod. There learning with his eagle eyes seeks science in her coy abode.
I think one of the loveliest songs that he ever wrote was A Fond Kiss, which is a particular favourite of mine. And of course that's one of the greatest love poems ever written and set to music. That was in connection with Clorinda in Edinburgh. When he went to Edinburgh, he met Mrs. Nancy Michaelhose at a tea party, and it was an instant love. There was a great rapport between them, and it was 12 months of intense passion. Among the Burns memorabilia, the Clorinda correspondence is among the more famous of it, because they're beautifully written letters, and that went on for 12 months. And A Fond Kiss came out of that. A Fond Kiss and then we sever. A Farewell and then forever.
At the height of the correspondence, there were 4 letters a day written. Nancy's husband had deserted her to set up and have children with a native woman in Jamaica. But in the eyes of the law and the Kirk, Nancy was still married. In the middle of February 1788, the Reverend John Kemp warned her that her reputation was becoming damaged, and so she had to end the affair. This provoked 4 letters from Burns, one of which said, "How shall I comfort thee, who is the cause of your injury? Can I wish that we'd never met? No, I never will." 3 years later, she went to Jamaica to attempt a reconciliation with her scoundrel husband, but before sailing, she and Burns had one last meeting on the 6th of December 1791. In her diary, she wrote under the date of 6th December 1831, "This day I can never forget," with Burns, 1791. "Never more to meet in this world. Oh, may we meet in heaven." Burns had been in her heart to her death at the age of 83. By now, Robert and Jean were unable to settle in Mauchline, and in June 1788 moved here to Ellisland Farm near Dumfries.
He left Ayrshire and went up round through Glasgow and across to Falkirk, and he spent some time in Edinburgh, and then he came down through and into the Borders. Now, it was the only time he was ever in England. He left his horse standing in Carlisle, and he got fined a shilling for his horse dirtying in the street, and he said he would never be back, so he never was back. He also had some very good animals. He fetched the first Ayrshire cow for Ayrshire down into Dumfriesshire, and the protege of that produced a calf which he received £18 for at the market at Dumfries, and the going rate in these days was 50 bob. But things was gradually getting worse. He was getting poorer. He could see his money dwindling away. Although he had got the money for the Kilmarnock edition, he had left some with Gilbert. And he went on with that money until such times as he felt that if he didn't do something about it, there would be none left. So he took the job with the Customs and Excise. This is what he had been seeing about when he went up round Fintry and across to Edinburgh before he came here.
Francis Grose, the author of Antiquities of Scotland, was staying locally, and he agreed to Robert's request to produce a drawing of the old kirk at Alloway if Robert would write a story of witches to be printed with it. And thus, Tam O'Shanter was born.
When chapman billies leave the street, and drouthy neighbours meet, as market days are wearing late, and folk begin to tack the gate, while we sit boozing at the nappy, and getting foo and unco happy, We think now on the Langscote smiles, the mosses, waters that saps and stiles, that lie between us and our hame, where sits our sulky, sullen dame, gathering her brows like gathering storm, nursing her wrath to keep it warm. Wheel mounted on his grey mare Meg, a better never lifted leg, Tam skelp it on through dub and mire, despising wind and rain and fire, whiles holding fast a good blue bonnet, whiles crooning o'er some old Scots sonnet, whiles glowering round wi' prudent cares, lest bogles catch him unawares. Kirkalloway was drawing nigh, where geese and hoolets nightly cry.
In November 1793, Burns moved into Mill Vennel, Dumfries, which is now a museum, looked after by Colin Christine.
It's a very, very substantial house, certainly the best house he ever had in his lifetime, there's no question about that. Good double-storey sandstone house, built about 1745. He moved in here in the May of 1793. He didn't own it, he only leased it. And he leased it from a friend of his, a Captain Hamilton. And I believe the rent was £8 a year. It doesn't sound very much now, but in his time, you know, £7 a year was a good salary for a farm worker. He could earn up to about £75 a year on his customs and excise duties. If he captured a smuggler, he got a further £50 for that. And he got a percentage of any of the contraband he could lay his hands on. So he was doing quite well. A much maligned man, you know. I mean, this is the thing that annoys me, with people that don't know a great deal about the poet when they come in. The one thing they all seem to think they know is that he was a drunkard and a lecher. So far as his time in Dumfries area was concerned, he was much more of a workaholic than ever he was an alcoholic. The cause of his death is really what they call endocarditis. It was a fault in the valves of the heart. He had suffered from rheumatic fever from he was about 14 or 15. By the time he was 7 years old, he was leading the plough for his father, and he put far too much of a strain on a young boy. And by the time he was 14 or 15, he was his father's chief labourer on the farm, and this put a tremendous strain on his heart. So he suffered from rheumatic fever, and because of the rheumatic fever, it developed into endocarditis.
Burns died here on the 21st of July 1796 and was given a full military funeral. 3 regiments of soldiers stationed in Dumfries at the time fired 3 volleys of shots over his coffin. A procession of over 10,000 people followed his coffin to St. Michael's, where he lay for the best part of 21 years in the pauper's corner before being moved to his mausoleum.
It's true that the fingers that struck the harp are now cold in death, but its notes echo through the long corridors of time. The world is his parish, humanity is his congregation, brotherhood is his evangel. Today, when we're bemused and bewildered by the complexities of life, we find a shelter and a balm in the simplicity of Robert Burns. I ask you to stand and in reverent silence to drink to the immortal memory of Robert Burns. Fair fall your honours, sonsy face, great chieftain of the pudding race. Upon them all, ye take your place, page, tribe or theorem, and wheeler ye word your grace's langs but airem. The groaning trencher there ye fill, your heart is like a distant hill. Your pain would help to mend the will in time of need, while through your pores the dews distill like amber bead. This knife were a stick labour dicht, and cut ye up, already slecht, trenching your gushing entrails bricht like ony ditch, and then, oh, what a glorious sight! Warm, reeking, rich. Then horn for horn, the stitch and strive, dealt the hindmost on the drive, till all the mules swell kites belive or bent like drums. Then all good man, mislike to arrive, with good hums. Is there, the tower is French ragout, our olio would stow a sou, our fricassee would make us spew with perfect scunner. Looks down,
with sneering, scorn for you on sick of dinner. Per devil, see him o'er his trash, as feckless as a withered rash. His spindle shank a good whiplash, his knave a knit. Through bloody flood or field to dash, oh, how unfit. But mark the rustic, haggis fed, the trembling earth resounds his tread. Clap in his well innameably, he'll make it whistle, and legs the names, and he'd so sned like taps a thistle. Ye powers, will make mankind your care, and dish them out their bill of fare. All Scotland wants nae stinking wear, like jops and luggies. But, if you wish, our grateful prayer, gie her a haggis.